Hello, everyone, and welcome to my podcast that does not have a name. I'm Emily, and today we're going to be covering some material from different philosophers such as Aristotle, Plato, Kant, and Augustine. Now, material from these kinds of people can feel super overwhelming at first because there's a million different thoughts coming at you from a million different directions. But if you look at them all under the same umbrella of a shared common value of knowledge and understanding of reality in its truest form, you'll find that all of these people are seeking to answer the same question. How can human beings relate to and understand reality in its truest form? Now, don't get me wrong, there's still so much information to cover here, but having it all under one umbrella kind of helps it be a little bit easier to digest, I think. Now, in general, there are kind of two different approaches to this question of how can we as people understand true reality. And they're illustrated pretty well in this picture that I have up on the screen. See, Aristotle is the one with his hand pointed down towards the earth, and he approaches the issue as if the reality around us is the truest form of reality. Now, Plato has his finger pointing to the sky because his set of beliefs is reliant on true reality being entirely separate from our own. Now, believe it or not, this kind of big overarching belief about how reality exists in its truest form and the ways that we can access and interact with it as people really trickles down into pretty much everything that we do. You can see it in every interaction that we have with other people or that we witness between people who don't even necessarily know we're watching. Now, I'll start with a more optimistic example of how this works with Aristotle's beliefs in our day-to-day lives. So, thinking about the reality around us as true reality, the epitome of truth exists all around us at all times, then we learn more about true reality just by interacting with the world. For example, say you want to learn more about and begin to understand the true reality of a tree and how a tree exists within the world and within the universe. It's pretty simple according to Aristotle. The more you observe, interact with, and experience trees, the better idea and the better understanding you're going to have of the true reality of what a tree is. And it's the exact same thing when we apply this to moral virtue. The more we experience good moral virtue, the better we'll understand the true reality of good moral virtue. And same thing with bad moral virtue. The more we witness and experience and interact with bad behavior and bad actions, the more we'll understand bad moral virtue. Now, this is where it's important to remember that Aristotle really emphasizes that we are creatures of imitation. The more we experience said good or bad behavior, the more we will imitate that behavior and form habits based on that behavior. And according to Aristotle, these habits are how we determine our own moral virtue and establish our own moral character. Now, I know what you're thinking. Emily, how on earth does this apply to what we see in our day-to-day interactions with other people? This is all still so broad. Well, I'm glad you asked. Because, see, if we as people have access to the reality of true moral virtue at all times, and all we have to do is practice good moral virtue in order to form good habits and be good people, then according to Aristotle, good behavior and good moral virtue and good character are all things that can be learned at any point in time. This means that at any given moment, we have the choice to be good. We have the choice to be kind and to make a positive impact on the world, no matter what kind of life we have led in the past. And overall, I think that if people were to adopt a view on reality that is similar to Aristotle, I think more people would try to be good because they know that they are capable. Now, unfortunately, this kind of optimistic belief system is fairly unique to Aristotle, and the three other philosophers that we're going to be looking at in this episode subscribe to a more Platonic belief system. Plato, who is actually Aristotle's teacher, believe it or not, was very insistent that we cannot understand or even really perceive true reality because it's not accessible to us. It exists in a different world, which he called the world of forms. And he explains this through a pretty beefy metaphor. So picture that you, and all other people in existence for that matter, are prisoners in a cave. I know. and you're chained up and you can only see a wall of the cave that is dimly lit from the back. Now, every day, all sorts of things will stick to our tree metaphor. There will be trees passing through the back of the cave, but you can only see their shadows on the wall. And so to you, your understanding of a tree isn't really what a tree is. It's only the shadows of a tree that you see on a wall. Now, if you were to, say, escape this cave, you would all of a sudden see a world of 3 dimensions and colors that was completely imperceivable to you while you were in the cave. Plato explains the world that we perceive in comparison with the world of forms in the same way that the cave exists in comparison to the world outside of the cave. We're not experiencing anything in their truest form. We are only experiencing mere shadows of how things truly exist. Applying this concept to physical reality could actually be really beneficial to humankind. We spend a lot of time trying to convince ourselves and others that we know a whole lot more than we do. But admitting that we don't know pretty much anything about reality in the way that Plato asks us to do allows us to take a step back from our ego and learn from other people and from the world. When applying this mindset to moral virtue, though, I see it getting a little bit grim. Because implying that we don't have access to anything in its truest form also implies that we will never be able to understand good moral virtue, meaning that we can never really be good people. This kind of pessimistic view on the character of human beings in general, I see going either one of 2 ways. Someone could either work as hard as they can to ensure that their actions are shadows of goodness rather than shadows of evil, whether or not they could ever reach true goodness. Or it could spiral into a mentality of, oh, well, if it's impossible for me to be good, might as well do whatever is easiest for me, even if it's a shadow of poor moral virtue, because at the end of the day, all it will ever be is a shadow. It is, though, possible to incorporate both an acknowledgement that we can't fully understand true reality while still implying that we can and should be good people. Kant is similar to Plato in that he doesn't believe human beings have access to reality in its truest form. However, Kant believes it's simply because we're limited to 5 senses, not because it exists in some faraway land like Plato's world of forms, but just because we don't necessarily have the tools to perceive reality in its truest form. In a similar way to Plato, Kant's philosophy, when applied to a physical reality, is wonderful for people because it takes the ego out of admitting that we don't really know anything about the physical world, and it's okay to step back and to learn from each other and learn from the world around us as much as we can. The big difference, though, is that human beings still have implied access to true moral virtue under a Kantian philosophy, because morality is a human concept. We do have the ability to perceive the true reality of good or bad moral virtue. So under a Kantian philosophy, if we can perceive and understand how our actions benefit or negatively impact other people, once again, similar to Aristotle, why not try to be good? If we have access to true moral virtue, why not try to obtain it within our own character? In regards to how philosophy impacts our day-to-day actions, Kant's kind of got it going on. He requires us to admit how much it is that we don't know while still implying that we can and should be good people and do good things. Finally, the last philosopher we're going to cover today is Augustine, who is quite similar to Plato and Kant in that he doesn't believe that people currently have access to reality in its truest form. The key difference here is that Augustine believes that reality in its truest form will one day be revealed to humankind by a Christian God. This is where Augustine's philosophy starts to get pretty sticky because it implies that true reality can and will only be known to members of the Christian Church. When looked at in regards to the physical world, this might not seem like such a big deal, maybe implying that only Christians will ever understand the truest form of what a tree is and can be. Doesn't seem like too big of a deal, but when applied to moral virtue, this really becomes a problem. By implying that only Christians have access to the true nature of reality, Augustine also inadvertently implies that only Christians can understand true moral virtue, further implying that only Christians can do truly good things and be truly good people, which is incredibly problematic on so many levels. This kind of belief, rooted in a fundamental lack of understanding and distinction between philosophy and theology, is pretty dangerous territory because it can serve to excuse any act, no matter how horrific, as morally virtuous, if and only if it was committed by a Christian. If you want to look deeper into the consequences of this kind of Christian-centered mentality, Kelly Brown Douglas dives into it in the first chapter of What's Faith Got to Do with It, which you can find in the description. All things considered, whether you think every philosopher has some merit to their beliefs, or if you think all of this is a load of hooey, remember that no matter how close or far we are from reality in its truest form, the impacts of our actions are very real on this plane of existence, in these bodies, and under these circumstances. The way we make one another feel is a choice. Whether you're choosing to seek shadows of goodness, true moral virtue, or even just kindness in general, choose wisely.